I have the wonderful privilege of introducing to you Dr. David Crocker. David Crocker is the founder of Operation Inasmuch. And some of you may know about Operation Inasmuch, some of you may have not, but in a few weeks on September 28th, is that the right day? Yeah, Wednesday, our entire campus is going to be serving. So we want to make sure that you hear David's heart today, hear why he created Operation Inasmuch, but also about what Jesus commands us to do. He's going to talk about that today. And so at the end of the service, we're going to have an opportunity for you to sign up for Operation Inasmuch. I was talking with Matt Bryant-Cheney, and there is over 100 people signed up already, but there needs to be more. There needs to be more of you signing up for that, and it's a great opportunity. And I just want to tell you from a personal side, my church this past weekend participated in Operation Inasmuch, and it was a great, great opportunity. We had over 300 people serving in our church, and so we had everything from children all the way up to senior adults. So I think our college students can definitely jump in. David has done many things in his life. He's been a pastor. He's founded a nonprofit organization, but he's also a dad and a husband to Brenda. He has 4 kids and 10 grandchildren. Is that right? That's almost a football team. And so he comes here today. So join me in welcoming Dr. David Crocker.
So I'm here today to, Jeremiah and Matt and others have extended a gracious invitation to me to come, and I'm very grateful to be here because I feel like God has laid on me a message that He is counting on me to deliver faithfully, and I welcome every opportunity to do that. To me, personally, it's a critical message that everybody needs to hear. And when I say everybody, I mean not just people who claim to be followers of Jesus. It starts there, but it really is a message for every person here, every person in Jefferson City, every person in the world. I really believe that strongly about it. So what I've been asked to do is to share with you some thoughts, some reasons why it would be important for you to participate in Operation Inasmuch in a couple of weeks. I hope you'll do that. I hope you'll do that not just because it's a way for you to kind of check off some requirements as a student at Carson-Newman. I hope you'll do it not just because, although it's a better reason, it's an opportunity to serve some people in this community and in the nearby area. I hope you'll do it for an even better reason, because God has put us together in such a way that we are hardwired to serve. And there is a sense of satisfaction that we gain from serving others we can't get any other way. Now, those of you who've done that, either in an Operation Inasmuch in a prior year or in some other way at a different time of the year, you know what I'm talking about. But I really want to kind of step back a little bit and ask you to think with me about a bigger picture. It's not about what happens here on September 28th. It's about what happens in the rest of your life. You are at a point, you are at a point in your life, in your journey, where you are formulating values and priorities and sort of setting a course for your life. You may not have done that yet. It may even be after you graduate from Carson-Newman that you solidify that. But that's a process that is going on. And really and truly, what I have to share with you today speaks to that process. And it has to do with the importance of serving others. I wrote a book last year, came out this year, entitled Compassionaries, Unleash the Power of Serving. And it's all about every aspect of serving others. It was, in a way, a kind of a culmination of 27 years in my own life of helping people see the importance of serving others and being involved directly in doing that with literally thousands of people in many, many, many different places. But it was more a response to a call that I felt on my life. And that kind of poured itself out into that book. If you have any interest in that, I did bring a few copies here with me this morning. And in a sense, I want to share with you from the experience of writing that book and some things that I feel like God opened up to me, and I hope He will to you as well. So what I have to share comes from the book, this book. I want to draw to your attention John chapter 13, a few verses. If you've got a Bible with you, if there's a Bible in the pew rack, I came in such a hurry I didn't have a chance to check. I'm hoping that since this is a church there is, but I'm going to ask you to turn to John 13, and we're going to read a few verses from there. It's going to be a very familiar story. Even if you don't have access to a Bible, you'll recognize the story. Whether or not you have attended church very often in your life, I think you will at least recognize some aspects of this story. So John writes, "It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for Him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved His own who were in the world, He now showed them the full extent of His love. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under His power, and that He had come from God and was returning to God. So, this is the part that I want you to see. He got up from the meal, took off His outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around His waist. After that, He poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around Him." And skipping down to verse 12. When He had finished washing their feet, He put on His clothes and returned to His place. "Do you understand what I've done for you?" He asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do what I have done for you." And that ends the reading of the Word. Now, as I said, this is a familiar story for all of us to one degree or another. And that's a problem. Because sometimes familiarity can keep us from seeing something we need to see. So I'm going to ask you to step back with me for a moment and take a fresh look at what John tells us in this part of his account of Jesus' life and ministry. There has never been a single event that stands entirely on its own. And that includes what we call here the Last Supper. Every event, every moment in time is part of a larger story. And so the context of what happens here that John reports to us in Jesus' washing of the disciples' feet, the context of His meeting with the disciples on that very special night, speaks volumes about what really happened there and what God wants us to see. I'm going to suggest that our familiarity with the story may cause us to miss something that is very significant here, that not only changes the way we see what took place on that evening, but also will have an impact on how you and I, thousands of years later, live our lives. There is a convergence here in that upper room of several plot lines all at one time. And we need to see all of them. The first is what I call the Final Four effect. You know what I'm talking about? Somewhere around the end of January, beginning of February, we began to hear about the Final Four coming up toward the end of March, the first part of April in the NCAA basketball tournament. And as the weeks go by, we hear more and more about it. And so there's a media hype or build-up to that special weekend when those 4 basketball games are played. 3, I guess it is, that we count. In the same way, there was a crescendo of events around Jesus and the disciples that culminated in that upper room when they and Jesus, they all gathered together to observe Passover. Jesus was easily the most popular person in Palestine at this point in time. If there had been any social media at the time, it would have been said that it was blowing up about Jesus. If there was any doubt that the movement around Jesus was leading up to something very special, his parade-like entrance into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday took care of all of those doubts. Sometimes the disciples are called dullards, slow to understand what's happening around them. And there's a good reason for that. But even they had to see that something was about to happen. As they assembled in the upper room with Jesus, I imagine them arriving early, half excited and half anxious about what Jesus might do that night. I imagine them struggling to keep their expectations in check. So that's the first plot line. The expectations with which, or that the disciples brought with them to the upper room. The second plot line was the escalation of the heat around Jesus by his enemies, the Jewish leaders. When Jesus began his ministry, the Jewish leaders were curious, which turned to caution, which turned to criticism, and eventually became fear and anger. Fear, because some of those leaders could see that this movement around Jesus might not have a happy ending. And anger, because Jesus sucked all the popularity and the power that comes with it out of the air. And they were left with nothing. All of the Gospels make it very clear that the Jewish leaders were dead set on getting rid of Jesus. Like a fire that smolders for a while before it bursts into flames, 2 things poured gasoline on that fire so that it burst into a bonfire. One was his entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday when the masses hailed him as Messiah. And the second was his angry eviction of the money changers out of the temple. Those 2 things were the 2x10, not the straw or even the 2x4, but 2x10 that broke the proverbial camel's back. And so, when Judas Iscariot showed up on their doorstep, they couldn't refuse his offer. I believe the disciples came to that upper room that night with a growing concern about where all this might be going. They had to know Jesus' life was in danger, despite his poll ratings with the people. They had to know things were coming to a head. Personally, I believe there were more than a few private conversations among the disciples about where this might lead and the impact it might have on them. I suspect they may very well have gone to that upper room hoping Jesus would finally reveal his strategy to set up his kingdom, which surely would include his way of dispensing with his enemies and protecting them. All of this political chaos was coming to a boil when Jesus and the disciples came to the upper room. All of this jittery, anxious wonder was one of a small herd of elephants in that room. Passover was another of the plots in play that night. Passover has been celebrated by Jews for many centuries and still is. That's a long tradition. A tradition that long is about more than simply remembering events from the past. It's about renewing commitment to a deliverer God. Ordinarily, the disciples would have been with their own family on that evening. This time they were with a different family, with Jesus as the father figure. Passover, observance of it was scripted. So a special meal was prepared, and when it was set at the table, the family would gather, and one of the children would ask, "Why is this night different from all others?" And the father would answer by recounting the story of how God delivered the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt many, many years before. Each aspect of Passover had the purpose of remembering some aspect of that story. So, when Jesus and the disciples gathered in the upper room to observe Passover, how do you suppose that script was modified? There were no children present to ask the traditional question. And who would speak as the father? Well, the fact is, the Gospels have absolutely nothing to say about any of this, about what happened that evening. But knowing the Jewishness of the men, and knowing that Jesus was kind of a father figure for their group, it's reasonable to assume the disciples came to that room fully expecting Jesus to say the things that are always said when Passover is observed. But that's not what happened. Not exactly. The last of the plots coming together in that upper room was the most important. Namely, Jesus' awareness that his work was coming to a close. After all he had done and all he had said to these men he called to follow him, what would he say this evening that would help them understand why he came? This was his last opportunity to say something to them that would stay with them and with all of his followers in all generations. What would he say? What new teaching would he give them? What would he say to them that would empower them to tell the world about him? He didn't say anything. He took off his outer garments, wrapped himself in a towel, poured water into a basin, and one by one by one washed the disciples' feet. He didn't say anything. And yet, he said so much. I'm willing to say that what Jesus did there at that time in the upper room may well be the most powerful sermon he ever gave. Right up there with the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. Because of its context. Context is everything. It's the stage on which words and actions make sense. In this case, the context, the expectations by the disciples that something big was about to happen in this movement around Jesus. The awareness that Jesus' ministry was on a collision course with the Jewish leaders, and the expectation of the observance of the Passover, and most importantly, Jesus' awareness that this would be his last shot at saying something to the disciples that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. What Jesus did in washing the disciples' feet is the most important thing that he could have done and said to them. And if you have any question about that, hear what John has to say about how he wrapped that up so that the disciples would not miss his point. He said to them, "You call me Lord, and that I am. But look what I've done for you." His exact words were, "I have set you an example that you should do what I have done for you." Here's the message I came to share with you today. Jesus elevated serving others to the highest calling a person can aspire to. It's more important than a vocation or a career. It's more important than anything else. So you've come to college with the goal of getting a degree that will position you to be a success in life, or at the very least, or maybe how you would define that, is simply being able to make your way the rest of through life to provide for yourself and your family and make a difference in this world too. But what about your calling? It may be that your calling is very closely connected with your vocation, but not necessarily. Jesus elevated serving others to the highest calling a person can aspire to. And here's the beautiful thing about it. Anyone can do it. Not everybody can be a college professor. Not everyone can be a lawyer or a doctor or a school teacher or a mechanic or you name it. But anyone and everyone can serve others. One of my favorite quotes about serving others comes from Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "Everybody can be great because everyone can serve." You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't even have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. All you need is a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. One of the bragging points for Carson-Newman, as you probably know, is that it is noted, it has been recognized, this school has been recognized for its commitment to serving. I'd like to think that maybe a few of you have come here because you want to be a part of that. You're in the right place. Just going out on September the 28th or once or twice more a year to serve others is not what that's about. It's about developing a servant mindset so that you recognize the needs of people and you have sufficient compassion to do what you can to meet those needs, making that person's life better and your own and the community in which you live better. Why is that important? Because Jesus elevated serving to the highest calling a person can aspire to. The way I often say that is, you're never more like Jesus than when you serve others.